first and foremost, welcome very much to Inside Recruitment. We're very fortunate to bring along Cameron Bagrie. I'm really pleased we've hit level 2. There certainly seems to be a different sense of energy out in the community today, probably a different energy sitting in the cities today. I can certainly feel it from where I am sitting today. Firstly, a really big tick to the government, obviously around the way that they have managed the health part of COVID. Really pleasing. Second lot of news, I think maybe even third lot of news of 0 cases today. So I think we can all be thankful when you look around the world at what is happening with that big COVID health piece. It's definitely something that I think the government has done exceptionally well. And this is the second part of the do exceptionally well piece tonight, which is how do we manage the economic outcome and the financial outcome of all of this. So without further ado, I just want to introduce Cameron Bagrie. If you haven't heard of him or listened to him before, you are in for a treat. Cameron was formerly the chief economist for ANZ, a team that was consistently ranked #1 for its analysis of the New Zealand economy. Absolutely developed a reputation, and I have heard it firsthand, of someone who is forthright and takes a stand even in the hardest economic times and on the hardest economic issues. He's worked as an economist inside the National Bank, Treasury and Statistics New Zealand as well, so is well versed with the public sector and government angle to this. And most importantly, I think for us and the audience tonight, it's going to be a very pragmatic approach, non-ideological, which again will fit with what we need is just a really good overview of what's happening. A last couple notes I've got on Cameron is, don't be worried. He is not shy in expressing an opinion. He is researched. One of the things I'm really enjoying about Cameron in particular, it's independent research. So that is something that you need to be very mindful of at the moment. Providing economic and financial analysis and research for organisations. And it's just a pleasure to have you with us, Cameron. Lastly, just about the way tonight will work. Cameron's going to really just talk through the budget today. He'll explain where he's been since probably midday or 2 o'clock this afternoon. And then we're going to have a Q&A session. So we are going to try and get to questions and some answers during this process. Down the bottom of your feed, you'll see something called Q&A. Literally just type in your question and we'll try to get that question answered in the second 30-minute slot this afternoon as well. And the final part is we are going to record this. So if you do drift away to go to get a drink and come back, don't be worried. We'll record it. We're going to send out this video. We'll also send out some summary notes that Cameron will type up for us, and we'll have that pushed out to your email. So you don't need to take an exceptional amount of notes tonight, but hopefully you'll just be able to sit back, listen, and if you have any questions, push them through. Last but certainly not least, just wanted to recognise Verna, who's one of our listeners tonight, or people in the audience. She runs an organisation called pillars.org.nz, an exceptional organisation doing exceptional work in the community. We're really pleased to be able to say we're going to give $2 for every registration through to Verna and her team, and we wish you all the best, Verna. An amazing charity, and we encourage people to have a look at that. So Cameron, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Troy. Look, can I just sort of reinforce one of the things you said right at the start in regard to the government? My personal view is that their crisis management of this situation has been remarkable. They've been really good, and we've got to give them their dues. I know there's a few grizzles out there. People say they should have shut the border a little bit earlier, but generally speaking, if I compare New Zealand's response compared to an awful lot of other jurisdictions around the globe, we need to sometimes call it like it is, and they've done incredibly well. And I watch CNBC and other news feeds because I'm watching markets, and I continue to shake my head each night in regard to what I'm seeing up in good old Uncle Sam, America. What I thought I'd do is that set the scene a little bit in regard to what we're dealing with here more strategically, and then take you through some bigger picture themes in the budget. To me, don't just think about COVID as being the driving force behind a lot of things that are going on. Yes, the epicenter of today's budget was a $50 billion response package, which by the time you put on the previously announced wage subsidy is going to be more like 62 billion. So we'll get into the detail of that in a second. But yeah, COVID is the ultimate disruptor, and we all know that disruption was coming thick and fast on a whole lot of levels. You know, we've seen a major wake-up call for having online capability, the ability to work from home, amongst other things. We've been talking about New Zealand about being ready for the future of work as disruption continues. But the reality is, and I think we've actually done too much. And COVID's a bit of a wake-up call. Yeah, pre-COVID, there are a whole lot of what I call super themes that have been having a major influence in our lives for the past 20 to 30 years. And what's been interesting is that a lot of these super themes have been starting to unravel pre-COVID. And what I think is going to take place post-COVID is that it's just going to accelerate that unraveling. So let's have a look at, for the past 30 years, we've been in an environment which has been all about globalization, becoming increasingly connected around the globe. And China's been at the epicenter of the global supply chain. What have we been seeing in the past 2 years? Tensions between Donald Trump and China, increasing concerns over cybersecurity. Yeah, people start to talk a lot more about protectionist style barriers. Now, what have we seen post-COVID? We've seen a real acceleration in that. And the danger is that globalization, which has been a big source of economic gain, the more we start to unravel that thing, you start to think about what does this mean on the other side for a small open economy such as New Zealand. Yeah, we've been in an environment, generally speaking, for 30 years where it's been all about unity. Well, in the past 12 to 24 months, it's been disunity around the globe. Group interest was starting to be replaced by self-interest. What are we starting to see more? This theme's starting to accelerate. For 30 odd years, we've been in what's called a debt super cycle. We've just leveraged up the balance sheet. It's allowed us to buy a bigger, flashier house. Interest rates kept on coming down. What have we seen in the past 2 years? The regulators have been starting to regulate the flow of credit. They're basically telling us you can't borrow too much more. It's almost like we're at peak debt in the private sector. Now, what we're going to see post-COVID is that we might be at peak debt in the private sector, but boy, watch what we're going to see in the public sector. We've seen a model for 30 years where it's been about shareholder-driven returns. What have we seen in the past 12 months? A lot more attention towards what's called stakeholder-based models. You're getting firms to think a lot more about the long game as opposed to the short game. You've got to deliver on your social license to operate. Think about the environment, people. They're less about making money in the short term. Interest rates have been declining for 30 odd years. We're now at the lower bounds. All those people that sort of think, the property market's going to come roaring out the other side after it takes a bit of a hit. It's not obvious to me because interest rates now are basically zero. The Reserve Bank's out there saying they can go more negative and not convinced borrowing rates can go more negative. We've been in an environment most of our working life where inflation's been low. Inflation's going to remain low for the next few years, but I think we could see the potential for inflation 5 years down the track. What is that going to look like? Have we ever dealt with that? But if globalization starts to unwind, which it is, we're not going to see those cheaper goods. We're going to see more expensive goods. Free market principles for the past 20 to 30 years, it's been about less involvement of the state. Have a look at the past 12 to 24 months. Pre-COVID, we're starting to see more nationalism sort of nuances. You bring capacity back online. For the past 20 years, we've seen a rising share of the economic pie has gone to capital and less to labour. And that's the corporation's business and less to the old workers. What have we seen in the past 12 to 24 months? Pressure to reverse. Raise the minimum wage. Focus on CEO remuneration, the living wage, benefit levels. More talk about a universal income benefit. What is COVID going to do? It's going to accelerate that stuff. We've been in a model, it's been all about growth, short-term, GDP is the measure. What have we seen in the past 12 to 24 months? Sustainability, environment. New term is wellness. You start to think about what COVID could do to accelerate the adoption of technology-driven food. Now, technology-driven food was already being accelerated because of pressure on the environment. Now you start to think about what could take place over the next few years, because we are seeing food supply chains being disrupted in key countries around the globe. America, countries such as Singapore, which is basically 100% dependent upon foreign food, now want to become 30% self-reliant. How are they going to do that? A lot of it's going to be investing in technology. Yeah, what does that mean for the primary sector across New Zealand? Yeah, as these themes start to take hold, we've been in an environment all power to the consumer. Consumption 60 to 70% of GDP. We've had a negative savings rate. We've now got a high debt. What if house prices don't create the wealth that once did? What if households start to save a lot more and spend less? What does that mean for the consumption side of the economy? And I guess the point is here, we're not just facing a different world because of COVID-19. We are facing a different world because there were lots of changes already in motion. And COVID, in my mind, is the lightning rod for some of those forces, some of those bigger secular themes to literally unwind. Now, the classic example here is globalisation. And New Zealand is a big beneficiary of a globalised, interconnected world. We're starting to see more and more countries around the globe start to think internally as opposed to externally. Now that sort of sets the scene to me in regard to, we can't just view this in regard to COVID, because we were delicately placed on a whole lot of levels. You're turning to the budget, like this crisis. But different crises require different policy responses. If it's the demand shock, the Reserve Bank, generally speaking, can fix it. They just cut interest rates. And the economy responds, we get out there and we spend more money. This one's a supply shock. And when you've got a supply shock, it's more in the government's corner to leverage off their own balance sheet. This is a supply shock with demand spillover. We need both the Reserve Bank and the government to be stepping up to the plate. But the reality is that fiscal policy, the government is far better placed to deal with the economic realities of a supply shock, particularly given that interest rates are basically at their lows, although the Reserve Bank is talking about them going negative, which is not something that I would be in favour of. If we look at the strategy, what have we seen today? There's a whole lot of different strategies the government could have pursued as a response. Strategy one is to go really hard and push lots of money into the economy. Now, the downside to that is debt. It's a tax on the next generation. Maybe you protect the zombie firms and you get inefficient spending, lots of leakages. Going fast means you're likely to be a bit inaccurate. And what we saw was samples of your firms taking the wage subsidy that, in all honesty, they probably shouldn't. I think that, generally speaking, was a small percentage, though. The alternative is to borrow less and spend less to protect the Crown balance sheet. But what comes? That comes at the expense of economic growth. More people lose their jobs. And then you start to think about fallout across social statistics. And there's no clear consensus across the economic fraternity in regard to what is the right response, because each has got pros and cons. If you go back and think about what we saw in 1990, 1991, we saw fiscal austerity at the time the New Zealand economy was imploding. That was a complete wrong policy response at the time. Now, New Zealand's strategy, and it came out today in the budget, was to go big and go really hard. You're literally emptying the tank. Money is firing out the door like I've never, ever seen. The government believes they can get the unemployment rate back down to 4.2% in 2 years by having a spending program that is literally bigger than Ben-Hur. Now, it's the right strategy, but this is not just about government policy. If we think about what's going on across New Zealand at the moment, it's really about the big stepping up and looking after the small. If you've got a big balance sheet, i.e. the central bank, banks, central government, deploy your balance sheet and help New Zealand out, because the small business community don't have the balance sheet capability to ride through the dislocation. But this is not just about central government, the Reserve Bank, the banks, local government. It's big property firms. Now, if you've got a commercial property, work with your tenant. You're probably better off to have a tenant in there paying something as opposed to losing your tenant if they go bust. Same sort of thing in regard to residential property investor. You're better off having someone in there paying something as opposed to someone in there paying nothing. But a real basic philosophy is we need the big to be stepping up and helping the small. In terms of the budget itself, what we saw today, before I get into the COVID stuff, was the normal array of what we call operating initiatives. Every year, the government steps up and they spend about $3 to $3.5 billion in a year, which adds up to be about 15 plus billion over about 4 to 5 years. So if I have a look at the breakdown of what do we see today, over the next 4 years, health gets 5.5 billion. It's been at the epicenter of this. Now, generally speaking, health would typically get about 4 billion. Now, this time around, they've really sort of stepped it up because obviously we need to prepare our readiness. Education got $1 billion, about 250 million a year. That's on the light side compared to what we'd normally see for education. Normally you'd see education over a 4-year period getting about 1 to 1.5 billion. Social security and welfare got 350. Law and order got 600. A lot of these sort of things are just, the government's a pretty expensive beast to feed. And you just got to keep your money rolling into them to keep the wheels running. The primary sector, primary industries, they got 400. Economic development got 900. Defence, 800. Housing, 500. Transport, this is not infrastructure, this is just operational, about 400. The government's still got about 2 billion of that budget package to allocate as well. And so they've actually got more money that they can fire into the system. But the package was 13 billion over 4 years. It sounds pretty big. It's just not, just realise that it's over 4 years. And of course, what we saw was also lots of capital initiatives too. Now, in terms of the COVID response package, the epicentre of today's budget was a $50 billion COVID initiative plan, response and recovery fund. Now, on top of that, there was another 12.1 million package that was announced in March. So the collective COVID response package is 62 billion. Now that sounds really big, but your pre-budget, about 23 billion had already been spent. We saw the March package of 12.1, and what we've also seen ex post has been updates included the expanded wage subsidy scheme. The budget includes another 19.4 billion of COVID-related initiatives, meaning they've got about $20 billion left of money still to deploy of that $60 billion package. Now, the 19.4 that's been announced in the budget, at the epicentre of that is a wage subsidy of 3.2 billion. My personal view is that that's going to get gobbled up pretty quickly. There's trades and apprenticeship training of 1.6, environmental jobs package, that's about $1 billion, 8,000 new houses, that's about 5. But what was interesting at the budget today was that they couldn't actually give us an exact list of what the initiatives that were in that 19.4 billion. We got to get it on May the 22nd. Now, normally in the budget, they've got a big list of, well, this is what we're spending it on. This time they could have produced a list, which basically tells me how quickly things are taking place and the money is literally going out the door. So hopefully we're going to get that list in reasonably soon. Within the trade and apprenticeship training package, 1.6 billion, 350 odd to tertiary, 320 million free trades training, 400 odd million support to employers to retain and keep training staff. I'm not sure exactly what that looks like. There wasn't a lot of detail, but there's also about 300 million for workforce development councils and regional skills leadership groups to be established. I hope that's more than a whole lot of committees. Personally, I like the trades and apprenticeship packages. There's lots of other support, transforming the primary sector workforce, various employment support initiatives, increasing the volume of people into trades academy places and secondary schools. I do worry about whether we're just going to see a whole lot more committees though. There's more funding for NZTE exporters, 150 million for loans to R&D businesses, support to SMEs for the digital economy. Well, I think from memory, that was only about 10 million. One thing I really liked in the budget, which some sectors are not going to like, was that they gave more money to the Commerce Commission to step up. And the Commerce Commission is now getting some teeth to undertake market studies. You go out and have a look at whether consumers are getting fleeced, whether there's something that's holding back competitive pressures. Now that's an example of an initiative where you don't need to spend big money, but boy, that thing could have some real big economic punch on the other side. If I look at the criteria for the fund, there's basically three levels to get that money. You're either fighting the virus and containing the blow, and we've already spent about 14 billion on that, or kickstarting the recovery, and that's support the businesses and households, and we've spent about 16 billion of that. And the third criteria for the fund is resetting and rebuilding. And we've got about $20 billion left. One of the big gaps, though, I saw within the budget was that there wasn't a narrative around it. There was a lot of money that was sort of going out the door. I would have liked to have seen a lot more communication around what that resetting and then rebuilding actually looks like. But to be fair, things are moving so damn quick, it's pretty hard to have that narrative. Have a look at the costs, the numbers, the tax liability or the debt burden on the next generation of taxpayers is absolutely eye-watering. Now, the government is expecting fiscal deficits for the next 2 years of 10% of GDP, 30 billion. Net government debt goes from about 70 billion last year to 200 billion by 2024. Gross government borrowings goes from about 100 billion to close to 300 billion. The government is going to be out there issuing about $1 billion worth of bonds a week. These are numbers that, in an ordinary environment are absolutely unfathomable. If I would look at the net worth of the Crown, their net equity, it was about 130 billion last year. As of June, it's projected to be 106 billion. By 2024, it's projected to be down to 39. So we are leaning very heavily on that Crown balance sheet, not just by leveraging up with debt. We're basically bringing down the net worth of the Crown to try to support the economy through on the other side. Now, those debt numbers also exclude debt being taken out by some Crown entities, which I think is about another 10 billion. Lower interest rates mean the higher debt burden is not a problem, but what happens if interest rates move up? If I look at finance costs are going to go from 4.2 billion to 5.4. That's despite debt moving up by 250 to 300%. It just highlights how important lower interest rates are in this equation. The government can get out there and borrow at incredibly low rates. But what we saw today after the government announcement, where the bond tender program was going to be pretty large, was that the New Zealand dollar and bond markets reacted negatively. That means interest rates went up and the New Zealand dollar went down. What does that mean? That's just a bit of a reminder that the government does not have a bottomless pit of cash. Now, we can't continue to throw things around like confetti, because the markets eventually will cool time. Will it work? Can it get the economy back on track? The answer is we don't know. It'll certainly help. But what we've got at the moment is there's a lot of uncertainties. Yeah, Treasury's baseline is that the economy contracts 5% in the year to June, contracts again in 2021. The economy comes roaring back in 2021-22, about 9% growth, and she's still pretty strong in 2022-23 and 23-24. Unemployment gets up to close to 9%, and then it gets back down to sub 5%. Now, what they've penciled in is what we call a V-shaped outcome. Yeah, we take a big hit, but we come rocketing out the other side because fiscal stimulus, government support acts as a big elixir, big driver of growth on the other side. But what we also know is that, boy, there's an awful lot of uncertainties out there. You think about the immediate lockdown. We've gone from a 4 to a 3 to a 2. Hopefully we eventually get into a 1. But what have we seen in Korea, China, Singapore? They thought they got rid of the thing and it came right back in the front door. So we're going to have to be alert to this on a whole lot of levels. Look, we don't know the virus properties, including the possible mutations, its resilience, the exact mortality rate, the contagion risk. We're going to have to look at the mitigation efforts of the policy response, testing, social distancing, health system readiness and capability. New Zealand may manage to quash COVID, so we might get sanctuary in New Zealand, but what's the rest of the world going to look like? And New Zealand's looking really good at the moment, but the rest of the world of not. If we put aside COVID and all that uncertainty, to get the economy going strongly again, you've got to look at the economic foundations. Spending your way to recovery is a partial solution. To get the economy back on track, we've got to do a bit of a basic test pilot in regard to whether it's feasible. Economists talk about this thing called potential growth, which is sort of how fast your economy can grow. It steps beyond the economic cycle. Now, a V-shaped cycle basically means you take a hit, but you get back up to the previous growth trajectory and life goes on unscathed. You lose a bit of output, but nothing much changes on the other side because life goes back to effectively normality. That is what we call a V. Now, the foundations of your economy is built around the potential growth, what's called labour supply, the workers. And a lot of that is driven by labour force growth, and a big driver there is migration. Capital accumulation, where the firms are investing, and productivity. So in order to get a V, the economy goes back to normal, we can do what we previously did in regard to economic growth. Labour supply needs to be the same in a post-COVID world as to what it was in a pre-COVID world. Now, I think the probability of that is basically zero, because I cannot see migration numbers being as strong as what they have been for the next 2 to 3 years. And I think there'll be a structural shift in migration on the other side. If I have a look at capital formation investment, I think firms are going to run more conservative balance sheets, less leverage. That's going to impact the investment cycle, productivity. Just have a look at what isolation distancing is doing for productivity across the economy. Now, at the moment, it looks to me like a temporary hit, not a permanent hit. But straight away, I move from what's called a V-shaped scenario to something a little bit more like a U. Because I think the foundations of the economy, before we start to talk about working from home and all these other sort of structural shifts that are going to take place, if I just look at the basics of the economy, labour supply, the process of capital investment, and how productive we are going to be for the next couple of years, I think we're taking a big hit. So what does that mean? There has to be a permanent output loss on the other side. Yeah, so I'm not in the V-shaped cycle camp, but I think it's going to take an awful lot longer to come back on the other side. And what Treasury is basically assuming, and the Minister of Finance said it today, was that if we can get the economy back on track, we're going to get back to being surplus, and government debt's going to start going back down the other side, happy days. It is critically dependent upon getting the V. Yeah, we might see the early stages of a V because we're going to see a sharp bounce in activity as we go from a 4 to a 3 to a 2. But if I have a look at the foundations across the economy, it's going to be a lot more like a U. It's going to take a lot more time. What does that mean for the government? What does that mean for the business sector? It means you need to reset. It means you need to think differently in regard to what the environment is going to be on the other side. It's not an environment we go back to normal, where you can just acid test this sort of stuff anybody, but just having a look at the shifts in behaviour we are seeing at the moment, and some of this I think is going to be around for a long time. Now, the other thing that the government is relying on to get the fiscal accounts back under control is to contain spending. If I have a look at the last three budgets, operational spend has been about 3 to 3.5 billion per year. Now, what the government is assuming from 2021 is that operational spending goes down to 2 to 2.5 billion. We basically slash it by a third. Now, is that realistic? I'd question it. No, it's certainly achievable. We've seen it historically. If we decide to go really tight, then we can get away with spending less. But if we don't have the appetite to spend less, then the other lever is going to be at some stage, we've got to look at other hard decisions. Things like NZS, raising the retirement age. Will there be political appetite for that? I think the answer is no. What's the other option? And something we need to think about on the other side of this, and particularly in 2021 after the budget, is what are tax rates likely to be? Now, because if I have a look at where I think debt is going to be, if I have a look at where I think the economy is going to be, we're going to have a bit of a problem. And one of the levers I think that is going to get pulled, taxes will move up on the other side. So brace at some stage, I think, for potential return of 39 cents in the dollar, or a completely new tax bracket with a 4 handle in front of it, $450,000 income, something like that. Yeah, but the money that we're putting on tax at the moment is going to have to be paid back on the other side. Just something, a couple of final points. There's something to think about. To get the economic recovery really humming, people need to be spending. Now, the economy is 60 to 70% spending. Yeah, being in work is critical, but also our attitudes to saving versus spending. Here's the question out there at the moment. Do you think your own spending patterns are going to be the same in a post-COVID world? I know mine are not. I'll do a lot more stuff online, but I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more focused on having more money for that rainy day. I think people are going to be more inclined to save. What if they think taxes might need to go up? The experience with Japan, where government's been borrowing for Africa for 30 years, if the government borrows, the private sector saves. And you just see this crowding out effect coming through. So these are just examples about some of the complications, some of the more strategic things we need to start to think about, because there's no free lunch. What we're doing today, it is a borrow and spend budget. What I actually characterised it today, it's actually a borrow and hope-based budget. We are borrowing for Africa, and we're hoping that it's going to work and the economy is going to come out firing on the other side. Yeah, to me, hope's not a strategy. We needed a bit more strategy-based oomph into this thing. I was hoping to see more of an economic plan. To be fair, things are moving so damn quick on a whole lot of levels. It's really hard to get something clear out there that certainly this is where we're going. Because the biggest certainty out there at the moment is uncertainty. This providing clarity is helplessly different. Yeah, but I still think we're going to need some degree of clarity or an idea about where we're going on the other side. Yeah, once again, to sort of wrap it up, the crisis management and the packages that have been put out, first class, right policy response. The gaps we've got at the moment and the information flow where we're live is what the big reset and rebuild of the economy is going to look like on the other side. And it can't just be about spending money and putting a tax on the next generation. Yeah, once again, one of the great initiatives I saw within the budget today was more money to the Commerce Commission. Yeah, I think we're going to get really effective outcomes out of that on the other side if they undertake market studies and they find that consumers are getting fleeced in a couple of areas. It's not expensive to deliver real economic benefits on the other side. So it's not just about spending money willy-nilly up the other side. Although, to be fair, we needed a package that was big, because the big issue across the business sector at the moment is cash flow, and they're going to continue to bleed cash, I think, right through 2020. So that just means businesses, this is a reset. Buckle up.
Cameron, do you have anything more to add? Otherwise, we've got, just maybe 13, 14 questions that I just want to absolutely maximise your time on. Is anything more just to close off there?
No, I thought I was a little bit over 30, but I tried to sort of wrap it up.
Mate, it's just exceptional. I think, really good take on it. Really balanced. I imagine it's quite easy to get emotional, but what I like about your take tonight is that it's very unemotional, pragmatic. And I think that helps a lot of people take some of the political bias out and really just looks at the facts and figures and some of the wider issues. So just on that first piece, thank you very, very much. I don't know if you can see your Q&A, but if not, I'll read them out to you. So
you might be, if you read them out, just so other people can hear the questions as well.
Yep, yeah, good point. So the first question we have is, are we heading back to a big government and a more state intervention?
Yes. On some levels, I think it's how much of a 180-degree turn is it? Not sure yet. But we're certainly going to see a lot more state involvement. Where it stops, I'm not sure. But if I ever think about, we saw massive structural changes after the GFC across the financial system. How the banks were regulated. Given the degree of policy response we're seeing at the moment and where the cash is flowing out, the foundations of what we call a market-driven economy, which, to be fair, we probably pushed a little bit too far. I think a market-driven economy is still the right one, but it's got to be a stakeholder view of the market, not a shareholder view. Mm. The difference between the two is that one's focused on the long game and the other's focused on the short game. I wouldn't want to go too far down the nationalisation sort of route, but I think we're going to head down there a degree. I'm a big believer in this stakeholder-based model, and I'd encourage firms to be heading there pretty quick, because the sooner we get there, the sooner we'll sort of be in that middle, nice sort of ground. We don't want the shareholder extreme short-termism, and we don't want the nationalist-style stuff at the other side.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. The next one we have here is, what do you see as the medium to long-term adverse side effects of a period of negative rates, if they...
If you think about financial markets, what we want across financial markets is financial markets to give us a bit of an idea about the balance between risk versus return. Now, if you look at what we're seeing when rates go negative and central banks take them into that sort of level, it becomes economic mumbo jumbo. Now, this is not just about negative rates. The US Federal Reserve looks like they're going to be stepping up and buying corporate debt. Now, for any fund that is now looking at buying corporate debt as an investment instrument, suddenly the US Federal Reserve has completely de-risked that asset class. It's nuts. Now this is the fine line we're facing here, where central banks are doing whatever it takes. But the more we take risk out of the equation, the more investors don't know what they're buying. And then it becomes real airy-fairy. The other thing which I worry about is that the more central banks do, the immediate vehicles that central banks initially support is asset prices. And if you look what happened after the GFC, the perception was Wall Street got treated well and Main Street did not. Because central bank liquidity, incredibly low rates, supported Wall Street. What are we seeing at the moment? Well, equities have somewhat recovered. My personal view is it's a false recovery, but unemployment is still moving up around the globe. The last thing we actually want to see going forward is, I think, another big uptick in asset prices, because I think Main Street, that's a recipe for society kicking back. The other thing about negative interest rates, if I ever look at the experience of Europe and Japan, has it really worked? The answer is no. We've seen the US Federal Reserve has come out in the last few days, including Chairman Powell, and he's pretty, he's pushing back on the idea of negative rates. He's not completely eliminating it, but I think they know you get down to that sort of zone, you're in a danger area.
Thank you. Do you feel that this budget is too skewed towards building in the trades, and could there have been more for white-collar businesses and innovation?
Yeah, I would have liked to have seen the wage subsidy a little bit bigger, because I think the 3.2 billion is going to run out pretty quick. My personal view was that I would have actually upped what firms are entitled to. I would have made it a scheme where you're entitled to take money equivalent to the minimum wage, which I think would have helped out the hospitality sector an awful lot, but I would have made it a loan. So you got sort of skin in the game from both sides. And of course, if the business goes bust, then there will be some of those that don't make it, well, IRD becomes preferential creditor. So there are examples in regard to what you can do. From memory, there was some R&D based stuff within it. I think about 150 million from memory. I've got a bit of a bee in my bonnet, stepping back and think about the big picture, not just R&D, technology, innovation, that sort of stuff. New Zealand's effectively overweight housing and underweight what's called non-residential investment, which is the real productive side of the economy. One of the big strategic themes we need to think about going forward is that how do we encourage people to invest in the real productive side of the economy and invest less in housing? Now, we've ruled out one of the obvious avenues here, which is a capital gains tax. No one wants to touch that one with a 10-foot barge pole, least of all on the family home. But it's a debate we need to have. If I have a look at what we're seeing across New Zealand at the moment, we are seeing mortgage rates continue to fall. Banks are still pretty keen to get out there and lend on a mortgage because it's a lower risk asset. What am I seeing out there across the corporate arena? Repricing of risk, credit margins going up.
The next question we have is sitting around, there's just some, I suppose, anxiety question relating around KiwiSaver, pensions. You made a wee comment around more the political aspect of that, but what is your take on pensions as we head forward? How strong will that debate get? Topping up KiwiSaver contributions, etc.
Well, here's the nasty side effects of having interest rates incredibly low. There is a generation of savers who have suddenly seen their retirement nest egg go from gold to bronze. And this is not just impacting the current generation of retirees. This is going to impact the viability of pension funds going forward. If you look at a stock standard portfolio, they used to say that we'll get you sort of 6 to 7%. Well, 6 to 7% in the era we are going to be in for the next 10 years is pie in the sky stuff. So you start to think about how these funds are going to pay for the pension liabilities. You start to think about, if you're a saver looking towards retirement in the next sort of 10 to 20 years, how much of a savings pool do you need to have on the assumption your investment returns, the yield on your portfolio, is not going to be anywhere near 6 to 7%. You're going to need a far bigger wad of cash. So ironically, out of this, I think there's going to be some pretty big incentives for people to save a lot more. Because we're going to be, I think, in a low growth world for a long time. Low growth world, low returns. You have a look at what we've seen in New Zealand over the past few years. Yields have been congregating lower. It's not just bond yields, it's residential investment yields, it's commercial property yields.
You talked a wee bit about migration, and one of the other questions coming through is, what assumption does the recovery depend on the global markets and our share of exports, China, Australia, the UK, with decreased spending?
Well, if you look at Treasury's central scenario, or the one put out by the Reserve Bank yesterday as well, that they didn't really have too much of a big hit in from the global scene. And if I have a look at what's going on at the moment, yes, the global scene's taking a bit of a knock, but we're not seeing it within the normal channels to New Zealand, such as commodity prices. Normally commodity prices take an absolute bath. Are we seeing a little bit of skittishness? The answer is yes, but generally speaking, the commodity complex in New Zealand is holding up really well. Now, a lot of that, I think, is reliant, or people are thinking, well, it's a short-term hit to the global consumer. The global consumer is going to come back in the second half of 2020. We're going to get back into it. The global economy is going to be okay. Happy days. I would seriously question that scenario. It would not be my central one. I think the global economy is a U-shaped outcome like New Zealand. It's not a V. So I think we're going to start to see the downdraft from the global scene start to come through in the back half of 2020 and 2021.
Thank you. Next question. Mortgage rates haven't come down as much. What can the Reserve Bank do to get more control over mortgage costs to raise free cash flow for household spending?
Well, the Reserve Bank came out yesterday basically saying they'll do whatever it takes to try to get retail mortgage rates down, and they're looking at it pretty closely. We've seen, I think it's the 1 and the 2 year, I can't remember if it's the 1 or the 2 year, the banks are now about 2.99, something like that. So we're seeing a little bit of movement. And if I have a look at what's called wholesale interest rates, 1 and 2 year swap rates, which is normally the benchmark of which your fixed mortgage rate is determined, they've come down a long way. So on the face of it, you'd suggest fixed mortgage rates should be a little bit lower. There is a slight problem, and the slight problem is that banks need money coming in the door. They need deposits. So if you ever look at the deposit curve across banks at the moment, it's about 2.5% right across the curve. And the problem for banks is that the Reserve Bank might want to take wholesale interest rates lower. They might want to take the cash rate lower. Banks cannot take deposit rates too much lower. If they take deposit rates down, they risk seeing capital flight. Money goes out of the bank and it goes into other asset classes. So we're really constrained in regard to how low mortgage rates can go just by the deposit side of bank balance sheets as well. So if you want to get an idea about what's going on, keep a real close eye on deposit rates. Now, the other thing is, just realise is that we're no longer in a settled economic environment. It's an unsettled economic environment. The risk is being repriced. We were seeing that within the dairy sector last year. We're going to see that within the commercial property arena. Banks are thinking going to try to get a little bit more margin out of their residential property portfolio as well. Good news is that there's a lot of competition within the residential space. Everybody tends to keep each other pretty honest. Yeah, but there's a limit in regard to how low we can take those retail deposit rates, because banks can't take deposit rates down too low.
I think just picking up on you talking about the banks, a conversation you and I had at the time, or just maybe last week, was around the social license of banks. You're quite uniquely placed. What is your take, on the banks, how they have operated with their social license that the government was giving them?
I guess if I go back and have a look at when I joined the banking sector in 1999, Sir John Anderson, the National Bank, this is how it worked. Look after your people, because the people looked after the customer. If the customer's looked after, well, the shareholder's going to make money. But that was the order, 1, 2, 3. What happened across the banking sector? It's not just the banks. It was corporate New Zealand and the corporate arena around the globe, was that the order got reversed. It became 3, 2, 1. It became really about short-term profit maximisation as opposed to sort of thinking about the long-term game. Now, we've seen society start to push back. We're starting to see greater accountability through the use of social media. Regulators have been a pretty big driver of this as well. The Reserve Bank's obviously been all over the banks, improving your systems, starting to think a lot more about the long game, less about incentives in front of people to just sort of sell a product. Make sure your clients are getting the right product. So the banks are moving, I think, a lot more towards a stakeholder model. But like most corporates, you sort of, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, because you like to be making money in the near term as well. But to me, that move to a stakeholder-based model is the train's left the station. Banks, I think, are going to make losses in the next financial year. In fact, Standard & Poor's came out, I think, can't remember if it was yesterday or the day before, and expect bank profits to fall, I think it was a loss of $4 to $5 billion. Now, banks have got the capital to absorb that sort of loss. Thankfully, the Reserve Bank was bang on the mark with what they were doing to try to build up the resilience of banks for that 1 in 100, 1 in 200 year event. Little did Adrian Order know it was going to be the next year.
Thank you. There's a question here relating, and just I suppose for everyone out there, I'm skipping through a couple of questions, just conscious of time and trying to get through, a variety. The next question, Cameron, is just relating to the green economy. So given uncertainties, how important, influential is the approach recommended by those who support a green recovery?
Well, the environment prior to COVID was the issue of our day, of our generation. So pushing back against this stuff is ridiculous. Now, I know the farmers have been taking a fair bit of heat over this, but by and large, I don't see too many farmers that are not up for what needs to take place. They're actually on board. There is a cost to pay. They're not exactly happy about it, but they're broadly in line. What's interesting in regard to the debate, in regard to the environment, sustainability, is how little conversation we have in regard to urban communities. We tend to point the finger at the farmers. And if you look at farmers operate under what's called a farm management plan, also a farm environment plan, where they've got to detail what they are doing, and they've got to get this damn thing audited in regard to meeting up with their environmental responsibilities, waterways, all this sort of stuff. Now, cheekily, I wrote the other week about, imagine if we had a household equivalent of a farm management plan. What would that look like? We'd have to go out there and check the soil moisture readings on the lawn. Are we using the right fertiliser? Making sure you couldn't wash the car in the street. Couldn't let the water go down the gutter, because that's the equivalent of the stream running through the farm. We need to shift the nature of the conversations. Is there a lot of opportunities out there across New Zealand? Well, I'll give people a stat. New Zealand, I can't remember whether we're either number one or the number second most wealthy country around the globe in regard to natural resources on a per capita basis. Now that to me spells opportunity because it's a strategic advantage.
Cameron, you run a business. What 3 things should you do if you're running a business?
Well, I'll give you one, because I don't like to overcomplicate things at the moment. Particularly in the current environment, to me it's about thinking small to stand tall. Quite often people sit back and they read the news or they look at what's going on globally and everything just becomes really confusing in regard to what's going on. Doesn't matter whether the economy is in a bad economic environment or good economic environment, you tend to see good businesses survive and ironically they can thrive. So one of my big themes at the moment and is it's not just about business, it's about the government. It's thinking about all those little levers, those little things that you can do, but individually, are they going to make a difference to how the government performs or how we perform in business? The answer is no. But if you do a little thing different every day or every week, eventually a lot of little things are going to come together. You tend to get to these sort of tipping points. So I go back to my example again in the budget. I really like what they did in regard to giving the Commerce Commission more teeth. Didn't cost a lot of money. But an example where a little thing can make a really big difference. I've been out there promoting the idea, if we want to get the tourism sector back online, yes, we've got to target domestic tourism. The New Zealanders that used to go overseas will now holiday in New Zealand, get the Trans-Tasman bubble. But let's extend the holidays. Let's have different holidays for different regions so we don't all rush down to Coronet Peak and the Remarkables in July. Make sure our school period is different to Australia. Real little things. But these are the sort of conversations we need to be having to accelerate, pull those levers. It's not just about throwing money across the economy for the next couple of years to help with the recovery.
I like it. I really like it. I saw your article too. I thought it was great. Any view on how the US looks in the next 12 to 18 months?
I'm worried. And I'm worried not just directly, I'm worried indirectly in regard to what that means for China. Because if the Chinese, if the American consumer's not buying, then the Chinese factory ain't producing. And if China's not making money, they're not buying stuff. And we tend to sell them a lot of stuff. Now, glass half full out of this is that the Chinese economy needs to re-engineer itself anyway to be less reliant upon manufacturing, unlock what's called the consumption side of their economy. The consumption as a share of GDP in China is about, I think off the top of it, 35 to 40%. A westernised economy, consumption is about 60 to 70. Manufacturing investment is about 45% of the Chinese economy. They actually need to see big parts of that just let it go. They stimulate the consumption side. Now, if they can get that right, that could be a really good secular long-term story for New Zealand. But of course, there'll be a few bumps along the road. The other thing I worry about in regard to America, and it's probably a little bit more secular. If you go back a couple of thousand years, we always see these what's called empires. The British Empire, the Roman Empire. And what we know is that they go through peaks and then eventually they implode and a new empire steps up and fills the void. I know America's got an awful lot still going for it in regard to science, technology, these sort of things. But when I start to see some of the things that I'm seeing in America in the past couple of years, you start to wonder whether that empire is starting to unravel. Now, it might take another 20 to 30 years to unravel, but you start to wonder whether we're at peak America.
Now, I'm really conscious. It is 6 o'clock for everyone. So we did say we'd take half an hour and half an hour. So, don't be worried if you do need to log out at this stage. Cameron, if you're okay, can we just ask, say, 2 more questions and then we'll close things off? Is that okay?
Yeah, good as go.
Awesome. So just a big thank you to everyone. If you do need to leave now, I completely understand. I hope it's been really useful. Again, we'll shoot this video out. Cameron's going to put some commentary that we'll email to your registered address as well. So yeah, thank you to those who have come. Next question we have, and I'm going to adjust it slightly only because it links to another question. So obviously we're sitting in an MMP environment. We've got an election coming up, and we are seeing, you know, one of the linked questions is, you know, tourism industry is worth $42 billion. They've been given some support. The racing industry is worth $1.6 billion, and they've been given some support. Yeah, just your take, I suppose, on where some of the money has gone, and I suppose noting MMP election, you know, how much has that played out in this budget, and do you think it's fair?
I think we're going to need the tourism sector. Yeah, in the overall scheme of things, what did tourism get? 400 million. Yeah, considering the size of the industry, not that large. Yeah, to be fair, they'll pick up a fair bit of that wage subsidy as well. I do get a little bit perplexed when I start to see big numbers thrown at the likes of the racing industry. Yeah, just you start to think about, well, is that an economic decision or is that a political decision? Yeah, if I was in government at the moment, one of the things I'd do to get people on board or buying into this is where we're going is that I'd put a couple of things on the table and I'd say, we're going to make a bold call because we appreciate we've got to make tough decisions. So if I have a look at an example here, it'd be KiwiBuild. Was KiwiBuild fit for purpose? The answer is no. Redirect the money and send it into, you know, all the Housing New Zealand houses. Well, it's a new entity there anyway, but you know, reallocate the money. And fess up, it wasn't the right response. Priorities have changed, but we're going to move on. Now, if they start to make those sort of, you know, hard decisions, I think they'll get a lot more buy-in in regard to what their, you know, resetting and rebuilding plan is going to be out the other side.
Thank you. Last question, and it's a good one because it forms a wee bit around optimism, and you've touched on it in different points tonight. But what are the upsides for the next generation, and in particular over the next 3 years? So there might be a kind of a two-pronged question, but what are the upsides for the next generation, and in particular, what are the upsides for the next 3 years?
Well, on the assumption that we can continue to squash this thing, and other countries, you know, see flare-ups or go through a far bigger elongated adjustment, you think about what the brand value is in Sanctuary New Zealand, yeah, and the ability to attract the best and brightest. And we tend to have this very anti-attitude to, you know, I think people call it, you know, we're not going to sell off a visa, you know, for cash. We bring these foreign investors down. We are not selling off a visa for cash. We are selling off a visa for intellectual horsepower and property. You know, we want to be attracting quality people around the globe, bring them in. Okay, they might build a house, but what we really want is their commitment to run a business out of New Zealand. Generally speaking, they'll be better internationally connected than a lot of Kiwis. You make it a commitment contingent upon hiring 20 New Zealanders, and you've got to pay them above the minimum wage. And so it's not about coming down to New Zealand and buying, I can't remember whether it's $5 or $10 million worth of government bonds. It's about coming down and being prepared to use your intellectual property. You run a business out of New Zealand. Now you start to think about now as well, you know, people are going to be a lot more health conscious. What's the ability in regard to us moving up the value added chain in regard to food produce? We talk a big game in regard to, you know, what we're putting out on the global stage. The sad reality is that we're still basically a commodity producer on a lot of levels. We've seen a lot of good stuff through kiwi fruit, new varieties of apples, but if you look at the mainstay of New Zealand's export basket, dairy. You know, big divergence between Fonterra and A2 and Tatua. Yeah, so, and there's a couple of others that are actually starting to move more into the value-added game, right? Yeah, so these are opportunities. Yeah, even if you think about in the near term, if we can get the Trans-Tasman bubble going. Last year, I think there were about 12 million trips by Australians overseas, and they tend to go up to Indonesia a lot. I don't think they're going to be rushing up to Indonesia. If we can get that Trans-Tasman bubble going, boy, there could be a massive influx of Australians. So we've got the ability to pivot and pivot pretty quickly if we can get the right thinking going on. Yeah, I'm a big believer in, I like the aquaculture story as well. Another secular story I like, if you think about what is taking place at the moment, COVID is going to accelerate the need to uptake or learn off the young. We're going to turbocharge the digital economy. I have enough problem fixing my printer here in my home office. My 10 and 13-year-old have to help. There's a big secular theme out there at the moment. I think we need to see a lot more younger people on the boards of bigger companies across New Zealand because they think differently. Diversity of thought. There's a bit of an old guard that needs to move on. Let's get the younger generation sort of encourage them to step up and make a bit of noise. They'll be making noise in regard to the environment and then start to make a bit of noise in regard to some other stuff as well.
Awesome. Cameron, thank you so much. I think it's a really good note to end on. There is some optimism out there. I completely agree. I think we've all got to battle, put our heads down and work on solutions collaboratively. I think we do need some of the best and brightest to help us solve them. I think if we can prepare for it to be slightly longer than we envisage, then, that will mentally prepare us and then economically prepare us. And, I'm personally really hopeful that, the country can get through and certainly needs to work well together to get there. So, thank you so much for your time tonight. It has been absolutely awesome.
All the best and be safe in everybody's quasi bubbles now.
Yeah, quasies. Thank you. Go well. Thank you all.
Yes.